Welcome, age of vintage society. At 42, Gable was a generation older than most of the crewmen he accompanied into combat. Nevertheless, he was there out of duty, not so much to his country, but to his late wife, actress Carole Lombard, who had pushed him to sign up just before her own death in a plane crash. Why Clark Gable had to shave his iconic moustache. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. The leading man in the skies. Clark Gable flew combat missions in World War II. When the United States was thrust into World War II in 1941, it wasn't just anonymous Americans who answered the call to service. Many of Hollywood's finest volunteered for the war effort, along with numerous musicians and professional athletes. Hollywood director Frank Capra made films for the US government, including the 7-part Why We Fight, 1942-44, designed to explain the war to servicemen and civilians alike. Yankee star Joe DiMaggio and boxing heavyweight champion Joe Louis gave morale-boosting demonstrations to US Army troops around the world. Big band leader Glenn Miller led the US Army Air Force Band in Europe and gave his life to the war when his plane went down in the English Channel. Hollywood stars Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart both served in the US Army Air Corps, dividing their time between appearances in military documentaries and actual combat. Gable, who decided to enlist after his wife was killed in a plane crash, returning from a war bond drive, served with distinction, participating in several bombing raids over Germany, rising to the rank of Major and receiving the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross. At 16, William Clark Gable dropped out of school to become an actor. He joined a travelling theatre and worked different side jobs that led him to Oregon, where he met his first wife, Josephine Dillon. Despite their age difference, they married and moved to Hollywood. Gable had a successful movie career, playing in award-winning films such as It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind. Two events dramatically changed Gable's life: the attack on Pearl Harbor and the death of his third wife, Carole Lombard. He was emotionally and physically devastated and decided to join the Army Air Force. In 1942, following Lombard's death, Gable joined the US Army Air Forces. Before her death, Lombard had suggested Gable enlist as part of the war effort, but MGM was obviously reluctant to let him go, and until her death he resisted the suggestion. Gable made a public statement after Lombard's death that prompted Commanding General of the AAF Henry H. Arnold to offer Gable a special assignment in aerial gunnery. Gable, despite earlier expressing an interest in officer candidate school, enlisted on August 12, 1942, with the intention of becoming an enlisted gunner on an aircrew. At the end of the ceremony, conducted at 2 p.m. at the Federal Building by Colonel Malcolm P. Andrus, Los Angeles Army recruiting officer, Gable mopped his perspiring brow with a large handkerchief and sighed with relief. Clark told reporters, "I don't want to sell war bonds, I don't want to make speeches, and I don't want to entertain. I just want to be sent where the going is rough." The time and place for the actor's enlistment were kept secret until the ceremony was over. This precaution was the result of the Army's experience with enlistment of actor Jimmy Stewart, who lost buttons and even a couple of locks of hair to a horde of Stewart fans. Devastated, patriotic, and at age 40 a bit old for military service, Gable didn't feel that the work he and Lombard had been doing to raise money through war bonds was enough of a contribution. He sent a telegram to President Franklin D. Roosevelt asking for a role in the war effort. The president replied, "Stay where you are." Gable didn't. He volunteered for the Army Air Forces, went to the 13-week officer candidate school and was trained as a photographer and aerial gunner. Because of his Hollywood connections, he was made a part of the 1st Motion Picture Unit, located at what troops called Fort Roach, the Hal Roach Studios in Culver City, Calif. His service number was 565390 and his dog tag bore identification number 191-257-41. He wore it around his neck along with a small gold locket that contained the remnants of Carol's ruby clip he had given her on their last Christmas, which was found among the wreckage of her plane crash. Newly inducted Corporal Clark Gable loses his moustache to Uncle Sam, having been informed upon enrolling in the Army Air Force's Officer Candidate School that regulations forbid anyone less than a first lieutenant to sport a moustache. Gable immediately went to a barber shop where half his moustache was shaved off by the barber. Then, for the benefit of news cameramen, the former actor finished off the job himself. The 1st Motion Picture Unit was commanded by producer Jack Warner, who was recruited as a lieutenant colonel. Flight operations were commanded by Hollywood pilot Paul Mantz, famous for his stunt flying in films, who became a major. Other FMPU stalwarts included Alan Ladd, Ronald Reagan and Van Heflin. Few of them went overseas, but Gable was assigned to go to Britain to film Combat America, a propaganda movie about air gunners. When the 351st Bombardment Group, equipped with B-17 Flying Fortresses, was formed at Biggs Army Airfield, Texas in 1942, Clark, Corporal Calvert Papoul, wrote to his parents, "Today Clark Gable is supposed to arrive to be assigned to our group. They tell us he is the same as any other soldier officer, first lieutenant. But they had a carpenter build a special luggage rack in a bomber here, and the bomber has gone to Los Angeles for him and is to return this afternoon. He will be a top gunner in a bomber." P. Poole wrote that the 351st would become a pretty nice outfit with me and Clark Gable. "Tell the boys hello and tell 'em me and Clark Gable are putting this 351st outfit in shape." Former technician Sergeant Ralph Cowley recalled events after the 351st arrived at Polebrook, England, and began flying bombing missions over the Third Reich. Records indicate that Gable flew 5 combat missions, but Cowley and other veterans remember that he flew many more. "Gable was assigned to our squadron, but not to a particular crew," said Cowley. "The group controlled his assignments. They wanted him to have an outer wing aircraft with a clear view of the skies for his air-to-air photography. He stayed with us right up from 1942 to 1945, and I can tell you they didn't put him on the milk runs. He took a lot of pictures of flak bursting beside his aircraft. They were very real missions in which he could have been wounded or killed," said Christopher J. Spicer, an Australian scholar who has scrutinised Gable's career. His film Combat America makes a valuable contribution to our historical knowledge of the war from the flyer's perspective these days. By the fall of 1943, Gable's crew had exposed 50,000 feet of film. Gable and a cameraman and sound engineer followed the crew of B-17, named Ain't It Gruesome, through 24 missions, including one where the aircraft was shot up by German Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters and lost an engine, with the crew eventually bailing over a field in England when fog closed in. Gable's combat missions, including one over Gelsenkirchen, where he was nearly hit when anti-aircraft fire damaged the airplane. At least one of his missions was aboard another B-17 Delta Rebel II of the 91st Bomb Group, where bald turret gunner Sergeant Steve Perry remembered him as a great friend of the enlisted men, as well as a great all-round guy. Interviews with veterans debunk the myth that Gable wanted to die because of his grief over losing Lombard. They describe him as a sturdy man with unnaturally large hands who took his duties seriously, maintaining a military posture, but was willing to party when appropriate. Promoted to first lieutenant before reaching England and to captain soon after, Gable followed up his filming of Combat America by returning to Fort Roach in October 1943 to edit the movie. Unfortunately, the 63-minute Combat America was released at the same time as, and completely overshadowed by, William Wyler's Memphis Belle, another saga of a B-17 crew in combat. Reagan, who went on to become president, called the film office an important contribution to the war effort. The FMPU eventually completed 300 training and propaganda films and was responsible for 3 million feet of combat footage. Gable was relieved from active duty as a major on June 12, 1944 at his request, since he was over age for combat. Because his motion picture production schedule made it impossible for him to fulfill reserve officer duties, he resigned his commission on September 26, 1947, a week after the Air Force became an independent service branch. Fellow actor Captain Ronald Reagan signed his discharge papers. Gable's post-war motion picture career, including a film appearance with Marilyn Monroe, drew mixed reactions from critics. Adolf Hitler esteemed Gable above all other actors. During the Second World War he offered a sizable reward to anyone who could capture and bring Gable unscathed to him. After returning to the United States in November 1943, he worked on promotional films and helped with the US Army public relations. He resigned his commission in 1947 and resumed his Hollywood career. Clark Gable died of a heart attack in 1960. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about Clark Gable's service in the military? It is so heartbreaking that he joined the army because of the last will of his beloved wife.